kept on getting put on hold, and then I was supposed to speak last fall as well, and obviously that was canceled, but I was supposed to speak on stabilizing patients for transport, and I called Monica. I'm like, my heart is just not even in this at all. That's the topic. She said I could, and so it was a lot closer to the time last year, but I still wanted to do this anyway, to do this for my Rylan, so we're just gonna do it. So that's my little Rylan. So I'll just be telling you guys his story. See if I can do this. So that's me. I work at Eagle Med, so I've seen probably plenty of you at some point. I worked with plenty of you. I hope you've had good experiences. I don't know, Monica might not have, but I'm here still, so she obviously doesn't hate me. But I also worked at Wesley. I worked at several other hospitals prior to that. So Rylan, he was born June 22nd. He was a 7th grader at the time when this all starts. He likes animals, he likes farming, even though he did not grow up on a farm. He likes trotters. I don't know if any of you guys have seen the YouTube videos with the guys, high school kids, college kids playing with their toy tractors. But he likes the green ones and not the red pieces of poo-poo. He likes sports, video games, racing. He likes the brand Under Armour. Nobody else in his family was allowed to wear Under Armour because that was his thing. He started his own job when he was only 10 years old. Frederick King's seat was across from their house. So he started going over there and they employed him. They actually gave him a paycheck to go and pull people's orders for him. So, there's some more pictures. That's him with his dad. They had a race car. That is officially Rylan's car behind them. The little girl's my daughter, Adrian, Kaden, and that's Rylan. And again, Rylan. So, March 2020, he had some flu-like symptoms. They diagnosed him with influenza at urgent care. He wasn't getting any better, so they took him to the ER at Hayes Med. Labs showed that he had some blast cells, low white blood cell count, low platelets. So they were going to transfer to Children's Mercy, mainly because they said with those blast cells, they can show up a lot of times in flu. So it kind of will mimic leukemia when it's actually just the flu. So they wanted to send him on to Children's to be evaluated. So when he got there though, he became super unstable. He started vomiting blood. They promptly intubated him. He got started on CRRT right away. They were talking ECMO. They started doing bone marrow aspiration, and then that's also the exact same day the entire state shut down for COVID. So my sister and brother-in-law were there. None of us were allowed to go there. None of us could have anything to do with him. Everything was done by phone calls, text messages. And then they're going through the scariest experience of their life and they cannot have anybody there with them. So I started getting these all the time. I get text messages constantly of, hey, this is what his ventilator looks like. Does this look okay? I was constantly getting pictures of the vital signs. Does this look okay? So that is Rylan. He is covered in petechiae. This picture was taken because my sister was FaceTiming me. She didn't want to take any pictures of him, and she said, can you screenshot this for me? I don't want this picture on my phone, but I want you to take a picture so I can show him when he's better what he looked like. So he, the bone marrow results though showed he had B-cell acute lymphoblastic leukemia, which has an 85% survival rate in children. It's much lower in adults, but with children, the doctor said this is, quote, the best kind that you can get if you're a kid, and it's the easiest one to treat if you're a kid. So we're super optimistic at that point. So he was intubated for quite a while. They started him on chemo, he got extubated, he had pneumos, which he pulled his own chest tubes out. and he spent a lot of time playing with Legos that they would bring him. So that is him hanging out in the hospital. So, one of the main things that I've had issues with the last couple of years is the COVID restrictions that hospitals put on. I mean, I understand the logic behind it, but then there's stuff like my sister and her husband were there. They're having to live at the Ronald McDonald House, and children's just saying only one of you guys can be in here at a time. You can only switch out once a day. So they spent 3 months where it was just the two of them in Kansas City, not allowed to see each other because one of them would always have to be with Rylan. So one would be there the first half of the day, they'd cross paths switching out, and they never saw each other. So the only people that they could talk to were the staff at the Ronald McDonald House or the hospital staff that couldn't see each other, couldn't spend time with each other, couldn't see any of us, none of us were allowed there. And it just, I know in our family and their family, it tore them apart. They had 2 other kids. They had a daughter who was in grade school at the time, Allie, and then Caden was 2 years older than Rylan. And so Allie moved in with my parents. She started doing the online school, and that's what she did for a year and a half. Caden stayed in Sylvan Grove because he was already in high school, so he just stayed with my brother-in-law's family, so that way he could also kind of take care of their pets at their house and get through all of that. So their entire family was just split up. So May 15th, Rylan got discharged to go home. He was going to return to Children's for the Kymriah CAR T-cell transplant, which is where they take your own T-cells and kind of replicate them, fix them, put them back into you, and hoping that will send you into remission. It's one of the treatments of choice for that type of leukemia for kids specifically. So he was going to return in July. To do that, he'd have to stay there for a month. So they were chosen as the Ronald McDonald House Spokesfamily of the Year for the country. That is them interviewing Rylan. So Sarah and Ryan, obviously they stayed at the Ronald McDonald House through all of that, and Ronald McDonald House did a ton for them. So we do have a Facebook page. You guys don't have to go like it, but if anybody's interested in watching it, I did post the video on our page. It was October 2021 is where that is. So the page is just called Rylan Strong. So he got the transplant, the CAR T-cell transplant, and then August 14th, he was officially in remission. That's him with his beads. Every one of those beads represents something that he had done in the hospital, and he has hundreds more since then. And they're all like, he had a blood draw that day, he went to radiology that day, he had this medication this day. Every single thing represents usually something poked in him or whatever. But most cancer kids, they have their journey beads where it's just hundreds of them strung up. So October 2nd, he officially relapsed. I was at work, my sister called me basically screaming. It was also the day the Ronald McDonald House video came out, where at the very end of the video, the very last second of it, it says Rylan is currently in remission, and it's ironic because that's the day he relapsed. So now the new plan is a bone marrow transplant for Rylan. So for those next 2-3 months, his new normal, he went to Kansas City probably at least every week, having bone marrow aspirations. They had to redo the port for him, had to constantly access it, had immunosuppressive therapy, chemo. Everybody got COVID in that time, including Rylan, no matter how careful you were. It was just, we all got it. Rylan had basically no effects from it at the time. That was them on New Year's Eve. That's my Adria, that's Allie in the back, that's his little sister. They were drunk on their fake champagne, the grape stuff. But, so that Christmas, I remember we're sitting around the table, and Ryan, my brother-in-law, took Rylan to Children's to do his stuff, and they call Sarah trying to talk Rylan down because Rylan's freaking out because they're accessing the port, which is extremely painful for him. And he's just bawling his eyes out. You can hear it throughout our house just from the FaceTime. And you sit there and you think about all the patients that you've probably seen where they're sitting there on their cell phone. What's your pain? 10? And I look at these kids and they just, like, they know pain and they sit there and they take it every single day. So we get into January. He starts doing his bone marrow aspirations and lumbar punctures regularly. The lumbar punctures is how he'd get his chemo. And they were starting to make plans for the bone marrow transplant, which was the ultimate thing that he would need again now. So they have to check out his bone marrow constantly because they're needing to make sure it goes below 0.01%, and he was constantly at 0.02%. So they decided to do another one of the Kymriah CAR T-cell transplants at that point. And they're hoping that that will force him into remission again like it did in July. So that's one of his x-rays at the time. So after he got that transplant though, he started having constant fevers. He got up to 104, 105 a lot of the time. He started having elevated troponin levels. He started getting fluid in his lungs, enlarged liver and spleen. He was also back on the ventilator. They're thinking that all happened because of the Kymriah. I mean, they're thinking this several months later that this was all because of that Kymriah transplant. But he went back on the ventilator again, which he loves. So there he is again, and I'm getting my pictures again all the time. He was on nitric because he was starting to have issues with his heart and lungs. You get on that for pulmonary hypertension. And so now we have Rylan, who's completely bald. He doesn't have his beautiful hair that he was so proud of all the time. All the nurses that used to like to rub their hands through his hair because it was so pretty. And so that is where we're at now. But he did extubate himself that time. He was tired of having tubes. So in the stay with PICU, he started improving a little bit again. His respiratory status was improving. They thought maybe some of his problems that time when he had to get intubated was just effects from having COVID in December, even though he had 0 effects from the COVID when he actually had it. He was still testing positive nonstop. But I think that was just a lingering issue from it. His eyesight was starting to go away at this point because he was starting to have hemorrhaging in his eyeballs, so he wasn't able to see people very well anymore. And then his platelets were constantly around 10. That made it every single time they wanted to do one of those COVID swabs every single day to see if he was found negative, that he would get nosebleeds and he would not stop bleeding and he had no platelets. And hospital staff, they finally had to get in and advocate for him. They have a comfort care team at Children's, and it's not the palliative care, it's just people who come in and advocate for patients. And it was just a team of doctors, and they were just fighting with the ICU staff. It was a lot of the oncology teams like, you've got to stop swabbing this kid's nose and making him bleed unnecessarily when he doesn't have any platelets. So it took about a month for them to stop the constant COVID test because he was just going to be positive. I mean, so there he is. I think no, that wasn't the Super Bowl, but he's just sitting there and he did high flow. He was doing okay. I just copied this post directly. This was one that my sister posted. We had our Facebook that I made for him, and I was her publicist. If she was posting, usually Rylan was doing fine. If you saw that the post was coming on under my name, then it usually meant something was going on, and Sarah was saying, Amy, can you please post for me because I can't do it today. But, so she said, a couple of days we were in the PICU, labs showed his blast cells were coming back, and this is when we're trying to get rid of all them so we can get his bone marrow transplant scheduled. His KRCS cells suffered from T-cell exhaustion due to the amount of disease in his body. He's been through so many different treatment options that they're becoming limited. This has caused a lot of stress in his heart and heartache for us, and our families, a group of very smart oncology and EMT docs, have come up with a plan. I don't know those meds, so I'm not gonna read them. On top of those drugs, they're hoping that the T cells will multiply. He was transferred back to PICU, liver enzymes were going down, bilirubin was going up, his liver's inflamed, and he has a hard time seeing. His lungs are still looking good. And he does have a lot of ICU delirium. He would cuss out nurses plenty. And he'd get away with it. He knew he could get away with it because he had leukemia and he loved the leukemia card. He played it a lot. He did it on purpose. He would laugh about it. But yeah, that was, their oncologist, Dr. August, was actually at a conference with all the top oncologists in the country, and they were supposed to basically like this, where they were getting their CUs. And instead they decided to spend the day talking about Rylan trying to come up with a plan. So this was actually a plan came up with by all the top people, because Dr. August couldn't figure out why what he was doing wasn't working in Rylan, because it should be working, and nothing was. So we're on the uphill again, where everything is looking good. They did the Kymriah once again, still hoping for remission. But again, he's having decreased heart function. So this is Rylan going for a walk. Sarah in Child Life loved Rylan. She'd bring the dog to see him all the time, and I mean, my sister and my brother-in-law and Rylan were there for so long. They're starting to be that family that everybody in the hospital knows. Rylan would go walking through the halls, and Sarah would be like, "Good job, you're doing great," and he would growl at her, and then just every time she would see him, she's like, "You're doing horrible, you're terrible," and then he would laugh at her. So, but that is him up walking. He can't walk anymore without crutches. Most of the time he's in a wheelchair, he has a leg brace on. So, and then that brings us to March 18th. This actually would have taken place a couple days prior, but it was a couple days before she could post about it. And this is almost exactly a year to the day when he got sick. So they received the results from his last bone marrow aspiration, and they weren't what they wanted. He now has 21% leukemia cells. And then they've decided that the bone marrow transplant is no longer a viable option for Rylan. So they sat down and they decided to continue chemo and try to just do what they can to keep everything in check. But the reality, this conversation was actually a under care conversation with Sarah and Ryan, saying, "Do you guys really want to continue doing this?" He's no longer, there's no solution for him now. He's terminal. They're talking about getting him into clinical trials, but Rylan at this point does not know he's terminal. Rylan never knew he was terminal. They didn't tell him. They didn't tell us, even though, I mean, most of my family's all in the medical field, so we kind of knew what it meant. I was sitting in Garden City. I was the horrible mother when we're at the park, the water park there in Garden City at the hotel. And I'm the mom where my kids were playing in the water, and I'm the one who's on my phone the whole time texting my sister and my mom and everybody, not paying attention to my kids, and trying not to bawl my eyes out in public when I'm realizing that this is pretty much it. So after this, Rylan starts having headaches and vomiting all the time. They did an MRI and they found leukemia in his brain. So he starts having to travel to KMed. Children's doesn't do radiation there. So every single week, the transport team would come and pack him up and haul him to KMed for radiation. That's when they got stuck in the elevator at KU. And that's Rylan getting to ring the bell when he completed his radiation. Only to immediately follow that with, he now has a leukemia mass in his bladder. So now he's going to do 12 more weeks of radiation immediately following completing the other radiation. So, he has to continue going there every week with the transport team. He no longer is producing blood on his own, so every single day he's getting transfusions. And then I got my very first call. Sarah had told me since the beginning, if Rylan's gonna go, that if there's anybody who has to be there with her, it has to be me. So I actually work in Dodge City is where I fly out of, and I live in Wichita. I had just gotten back from Dodge City, and she calls me the second I got home, and it's like, you need to get here now. He had vagaled down, went unresponsive, they hauled him to PICU, he was intubated. She said, you need to get here now, he's not gonna make it. And we actually had permission to go in during COVID, which everybody knows what that means. So we've had a year of nobody being allowed in. They were home for a few months during Rylan's good time. So it's not that we hadn't seen him, but he had been there now, this is May, he'd been there since the beginning of January, that none of us had been allowed to see him. So those are all of our badges though, on Sarah when we were leaving. She's laughing, but it was more, you can tell she's crying too. So he made it through that little spell. We didn't think he was gonna make it. His blood pressure was down in the 50s. So that was when we were all getting ready to leave. We were able to visit for a couple days there. So when we left, we shoved our stickers all over her, and then they all were on Rylan's wall in his room too, so. But that was a false alarm, and we all went home, not allowed back in again. And then Rylan got to go home. They had an apartment in Kansas City that they had gotten by this time, because they knew that they wouldn't be able to go back to Silver Grove. It was too far away from children, so they had an apartment there. But then the beginning of June, he was able to come home for the weekend. Allie, his sister, had her dance recital. She's actually doing a dance that she dedicated to Rylan, and it makes you bawl your eyes out when you watch it. So they came home for the dance recital. They gave him massive transfusions that Friday. They doubled up everything for him. And he was still getting stuff. He had his port and a pump going pretty regularly. But he got to come home for the weekend, and there he is. My father-in-law has a Model T. It was Prairie Est weekend in Russell. They have this Prairie Est every decade, a big celebration where all the men, they grow out their beards and everybody dresses like they're from the 1800s. And then they have their parade, but that was Adrian dressed up in her outfit, and then Rylan got to go for a ride. That's my father-in-law. You can't really see him very well, but he's got his long beard, and he normally doesn't look like that at all. And then that's Allie in her dance outfit with Rylan. So, he'd been looking forward to riding the Model T for about a week. It took a lot of planning and trying to get that, and they just went for a quick 20-minute ride before the parade, because he couldn't have handled it in the heat and actually sitting there during the parade. So they just did their own little thing before. But then by that Monday morning, they were going to go back that day, but he got severely dehydrated. His port had clotted off where he was getting his infusions. So he had clotted off, and he wasn't receiving his infusions. His blood pressure was in the 40s, and you can imagine the local volunteer EMS crew when they got called to my sister's house in Silver Grove, and they are EMTs, not even able to get IV access, nothing. And they go there, and their automated cuff is showing nothing, their manual cuff is showing 40s, and my sister's got her binder. She's like, you need to do this, and this, and they're just, so they just started doing what they had to do. They rushed to the hospital at Lincoln, and they called our helicopter there to come pick him up. My sister called me before they even got to the hospital, and I just jumped in my car and started heading to Children's. So that's Rylan loaded on the helicopter. He is on there, and those are
That's me tracking the flight right there, and that's me driving. I think they flew over me. I never got to actually see them, which I should have been able to because they're only at 1,900 feet, but I never spotted them.
So, Sarah was able to get me special permission to get in there to the ER and be able to meet Rylan there. I ended up getting there while the transport team was still there, packing up to leave. So Sarah and Ryan were still 2 hours out at that point, but I had to go in there that way. One, I could stop them from doing the COVID test that was just gonna cause them to bleed. And Sarah had already made arrangements for the oncology people to come down and access his port, because his port was at a weird angle where there was literally 2 people at Children's who could access it, because nobody else could ever get it. And everybody who called the HEMONC floor and they say, hey, Rylan Gear's here, he needs port access, they're all gonna be like, no, you need to call so-and-so. So we get there, and I had the nurse who says, well, I've been doing this for 20 years, I know what I'm doing, I can do it. And I'm like, I don't think that's gonna work out so well. And Rylan is there crying, whimpering, because he knows what's getting ready to come. And she's arguing with me. I got Sarah on the phone, and Sarah's like, you're allowed 1 poke. If you can't get in 1 poke, you're not doing it again. She said, I already have oncology coming down. I've already talked to all of them. You can wait, you're only allowed to do it once though. She missed. The oncology nurse came down, she got it on the first try. And she was like, yeah, nobody else is allowed to touch Rylan's ports, there's a reason. But, so, he got all started getting fluids, he started getting his blood. He looked amazing by that night even. So, he turned 14 on June 22nd of 2021. That's his birthday celebration. My
Parents are both up at the head of bed. They let them come up for it, and they let his siblings, Allie's down here, but you can see his older brother Caden sitting back there on the bed crying, and that's Rylan's dad standing next to him trying to comfort him. And then just all the nursing staff, because that's a 14-year-old's birthday in the hospital. So, again, Sarah with Child Life made decorations. So, we had lots of them all over the room, similar to this of Rylan, making fun of him. But that is his personality right there. That was him making fun of his older brother on the way to a school dance, photobombing him. That's him wearing cat ears with Allie. So, he was just a dopey kid. So, that brings us July 1st. I was working that day. We do 24-hour shifts. And since March of 2020, I have been dying for a Kansas City flight during the day, so I could have an excuse to go and see my sister. I would have done anything for a flight to Children's at that point. It was kind of a joke at our base. We did not have 1 Kansas City flight the entire time that Rylan was there. Because I would have even had stuff at our base for people to just drop off at Children's for them. But we got none. And then July 1st, we finally got our Kansas City flight, and I called Sarah. She was all excited. She got special permission for me to come in and visit. And we dropped our patient off at KU. We're heading back to the FBO. Our pilot calls and says, we got another flight. And I tried to get out of it, and I can't get out of it. And so I was heartbroken. Sarah was heartbroken. It was just devastating. So then we find out it's another cancer kid. And my sister's like, well, they probably need you more than we do at this moment, because there's probably nobody else transporting anywhere that understands as well as I do at that point. So we go to Stormont, we pick up my kid, who I became pretty close with his mom. Me and her still talk to this day. Fly him to St. Louis, and then by then we're stuck. The pilot's out of time. We can't do anything at that point. We have to stay the night in St. Louis, and we can't leave again until the morning. And we were out to eat, and then I got a phone call, and it wasn't even Sarah, it was the doctor, because my sister couldn't talk, and it was, you need to get there now, he's not gonna make it through the night. And I'm like, I can't, I physically cannot leave this city right now. And I can hear Sarah in the background, but she has to come, because she's sitting there telling her I can't come. And, so that was awful, to say the least. That picture was taken by my partner that night. The three of us were just sitting there on the stairs of the river. And our pilot got special permission to fly me to Kansas City in the morning. He was able to time on again at 5 a.m. So 5 a.m. we hopped on the plane and they flew me to Kansas City, drove me to Children's, and so we all were there. My family, some of my brother-in-law's family were there. My mom and dad were actually in Dallas at the time. Allie had her national dance competition where she was doing her Rylan dance. So I got there early in the morning on July 2nd. My parents were able to get there at 10 o'clock that night. Allie was able to get there. Rylan held on all day. My sister made me stay in the room. I wasn't allowed to leave. And my dad stayed in the room, and then once we all fell asleep at about 2 in the morning, Rylan passed. I woke up because he was on the BiPAP, and everyone who probably knows what the sound makes. It woke me up when the sound was different. I wake up, I stand up to go adjust his mask, which I'd done many times that entire day, and like Sarah, his eyes are open. His eyes hadn't been open for the whole day. And she's like, what? And you look, his eyes are open, and then you look and you see the feet under the door as they're all gowning up. And they said that his heart rate was going the way it had been going all day, and then it just stopped like zero. He was just done. We don't know if he just waited until we all got there, because he was supposed to go the night before. I wasn't supposed to make it. My parents certainly weren't supposed to make it from Dallas. So that was that. So that was the post I had to make. He passed July 3rd at 2:47 a.m. That was the hardest one to post. That's him and Allie fishing. So I had put out a call for him to get birthday cards. He got 140 birthday cards in the mail a couple weeks before from all over the place. Children's has a thing where you can send cards to kids where you just get on their website and you put in their name and their room number, and they just print them off and deliver them, just like the old computer ones that they would fold up. And so Rylan had hundreds and hundreds of cards from people. So September is Childhood Cancer Awareness Month. Nobody really pays attention to childhood cancer at all. Everybody wears the pink ribbons, everybody has pink outs, everybody does all of that, but childhood cancer, it gets less than 4% of the money for research. They've only done, in the last 4 decades, they've made 4 drugs for them. 7 of them were adult drugs that they approved for kids, and they've done hundreds and hundreds of them for adults. I think for that reason right there, that everybody gets super uncomfortable when you see a kid that's dying of cancer. Nobody wants to look at that. But that is that. That's our little Rylan. I mean, just because he turned into that, that's who he is. He's everybody's kid. So, that's Sarah and Ryan back when things were normal. So, my takeaways, they're probably different than most of the other ones. I guess be kind to people, show a little bit of grace. When I'm trying to fly into one of your facilities, not specifically me, but just an example, like when I'm coming in to pick up our oncology patient and I see those labs and I know exactly what that kid's about to be diagnosed with, and I'm transferring that patient to PICU bed 4 at Children's, And my face probably doesn't look normal to everybody. It's probably because I'm taking them to the room where my nephew just died with the exact same reason. And that's a true story that I actually did that transport. Not too long after Rylan died, I went back to that room with the kid dying with the exact same thing. But I mean, your coworkers, everybody's going through stuff, and you don't know what they're going through, and we all try to keep that smile on our face and pretend like everything's fine, or you don't know that people are dealing with this, and as much as we try to keep our crap together all the time, there's a lot of us dealing with this, and people just don't know. COVID restrictions on families, I cringe every time I see hospitals locking down again. I mean, I know Wesley just did theirs again a couple months ago, and I was just like, oh no, please don't do that. That kills people, that kills patients, it might not be physically killing them, but it is destroying them. And then my main one is please listen to parents and family, especially those chronic kids. You see people who assume that, I mean, we all know the patient who their family member is a CNA, and that CNA is an expert on everything. And these people with their chronic kids, they know their crap. Like, my sister can name you cancer drugs that you would not believe, that I've never heard of, I'm never gonna touch, I would know nothing about them, and she knew, by the end of it, she knew every vent setting he could be on, what he was gonna react to, she knew everything in and out. Those parents walk in with their binder, and it's everything. Like, if they're saying you're not allowed to access that port because only 2 people can access it, it's not just someone being a pain in the butt who, they walk in and they say, oh, I'm a really hard stick. Like, no, they mean that there's 2 people who can access this port, and you probably shouldn't be trying to touch it. And then just everybody be Rylan Strong for him. So, and that is his grave.
That's his, they have a hill that when Ryan was younger, him and his brother they did the gear sign out on their land, and those are his 2 cats, Berber and Skunk.
So, that is it.